The Sword and the Stone, Chapter 6. One Thursday afternoon, the boys were doing their archery as usual. There were 2 straw targets, 50 yards apart, and when they had shot their arrows at one, they had only to go to it, collect them, and shoot back at the other, after facing about. It was still the loveliest summer weather, and there had been chicken for dinner, so that Merlin had gone off to the edge of their shooting ground and sat down under a tree. What with the warmth and the chicken and the cream he had poured over his pudding, and the continual repassing of the boys, and the talk of the arrows and the targets, which was as sleepy to listen to as the noise of a lawn-mower or of a village cricket match, and what with the dance of the egg-shaped sunspots between the leaves of his tree, the aged man was soon fast asleep. Archery was a serious occupation in those days. It had not yet been turned over to Indians and small boys. When you were shooting badly, you got into a bad temper, just as the wealthy pheasant shooters do today. Kay was shooting badly. He was trying too hard and plucking on his loose instead of leaving it to the bow. "Oh, come on," he said. "I am sick of these beastly targets. Let's have a shot at the popinjay." They left the targets and had several shots at the popinjay, which was a large, bright-colored artificial bird stuck on the top of a stick, like a parrot, and Kay missed these also. First, he had the feeling of, "Well, I will hit the filthy thing, even if I have to go without my tea until I do it." Then he merely became bored. The wart said, "Let's play rovers, then. We can come back in half an hour and wake Merlin up." What they called rovers consisted in going for a walk with their bows and shooting 1 arrow each at any agreed mark which they came across. Sometimes it would be a molehill, sometimes a clump of rushes, sometimes a big thistle almost at their feet. They varied the distance at which they chose these objects, sometimes picking a target as much as 120 yards away, which was about as far as these boys' bows could carry, and sometimes having to aim actually below a close thistle, because the arrow always leaps up a foot or 2 as it leaves the bow. They counted 5 for a hit, and 1 if the arrow was within a bow's length, and they added up their scores at the end. On this Thursday they chose their targets wisely. Besides, the grass of the big field had been lately cut, so that they never had to search for their arrows for long, which nearly always happens, as in golf, if you shoot ill-advisedly near hedges or in rough places. The result was that they strayed farther than usual, and found themselves near the edge of the savage forest where Cully had been lost. "I vote," said Kay, "that we go to those berries in the chase and see if we can get a rabbit. It would be more fun than shooting at these hummocks." They did this. They chose 2 trees about 100 yards apart, and each boy stood under one of them, waiting for the conies to come out again. They stood still, with their bows already raised and arrows fitted, so that they would make the least possible movement to disturb the creatures when they did appear. It was not difficult for either of them to stand thus, for the first test which they had had to pass in archery was standing with the bow at arm's length for half an hour. They had 6 arrows each, and would be able to fire and mark them all before they needed to frighten the rabbits back by walking about to collect. An arrow does not make enough noise to upset more than the particular rabbit that it is shot at. At the 5th shot, Kay was lucky. He allowed just the right amount for wind and distance, and his point took a young coney square in the head. It had been standing up on end to look at him, wondering what he was. "Oh, well shot!" cried the wart as they ran to pick it up. It was the first rabbit they had ever hit, and luckily they had killed it dead. When they had carefully gutted it with the hunting knife which Merlin had given, to keep it fresh, and passed one of its hind legs through the other at the hock for convenience in carrying, the 2 boys prepared to go home with their prize. But before they unstrung their bows, they used to observe a ceremony. Every Thursday afternoon, after the last serious arrow had been shot, they were allowed to fit 1 more knock to their strings, and to shoot the arrow straight up into the air. It was partly a gesture of farewell, partly of triumph, and it was beautiful. They did it now as a salute to their first prey. The wart watched his arrow go up. The sun was already westing towards evening, and the trees were where they had plunged them into a partial shade. So as the arrow topped the trees and climbed into sunlight, it began to burn against the evening like the sun itself. Up and up it went, not weaving as it would have done with a snatching loose, but soaring, swimming, aspiring to heaven, steady, golden, and superb. Just as it had spent its force, just as its ambition had been dimmed by destiny, and it was preparing to faint, to turn over, to pour back into the bosom of its Mother Earth, a portent happened. A gorcrow came flapping wearily before the approaching night. It came, it did not waver, it took the arrow. It flew away, heaving and hoisting, with the arrow in its beak. Kay was frightened by this, but the wart was furious. He had loved his arrow's movement, its burning ambition in the sunlight, and besides, it was his best one. It was the only one which was perfectly balanced, sharp, tight-feathered, clean-nocked, and neither warped nor scraped. "It was a witch," said Kay.